You're never going to be able to speak Russian fluently if you don't learn the principle that I'm going to teach you today in this video. Sure, you can regurgitate pre-memorized dialogue or recite trite touristy phrases, but you're never going to be able to share your own thoughts and feelings with other native Russian speakers unless you learn Russian first conjugation. Now, listen to that, first conjugation. The name alone makes it sound like it's a hard principle or that you're going to have to spend days learning it. Having lived in Russia for 2 years, having taught the language for 3 years, I've come up with a really simple and effective way to teach this to you. By the end of this video, you're going to know which verbs require the first conjugation. I'm going to help you memorize the endings, and then you're going to know how to add the endings to verbs correctly. Давайте начнем. Меня зовут Jared, я делаю русский язык легким. Hey everybody, my name's Jared and I make the Russian language easy. These videos are geared towards anybody learning Russian, but specifically towards students who are in a formal language learning program, but need a little additional help. Before we dive in and figure out how to conjugate verbs, I want to give you a very quick 30-second overview as to what conjugation is. In English, we may say something like, I'm reading, or he's reading. And we know who's doing the reading based on the I or the he. In grammar terms, that's called a personal pronoun. But in Russian, you don't have to add the personal pronouns. You don't have to say I and he. You can just say reading. Because Russians add endings to their verbs to indicate who or what is doing the action. And that's what conjugation is. It's adding endings based on who or what is doing the action. Now, if you don't quite understand that, the rest of this video is going to be a little hard to understand because we're going to conjugate verbs and you may not fully understand why we're doing that. I have a video which you can watch right here. It's quick, 10 minutes, and it dives deeper into what is conjugation, and it explains it in a little bit more in depth. I would recommend you go watch that if you're not following what it is. All right, but if you feel like you're comfortable with what conjugation is, let's get started with the first question, and that is, how do we know which verbs require the first conjugation? In Russian, all verbs are grouped into two categories, first conjugation and second conjugation. Those verbs which end in the a te miyaki znak go into first conjugation. So let's take the verb znat and the verb говорить. We can see here that znat ends in the a te miyaki znak, so it needs first conjugation. Говорить ends in I te miyaki znak. It doesn't end in first conjugation, and because there's only two, we know that one goes into the second conjugation. Now, the majority of first conjugation verbs in Russian will end in that a te miyaki znak, and that's really what I want you to focus on today. But I also want to just give you a heads up that first conjugation verbs can also end in ye te miyaki znak or u te. And you don't really need to worry about that right now. You're just getting an introduction into conjugation here. So just focus on the a te miyaki znak. But know there are a decent number of verbs that have different endings that do take the first conjugation. That'll come to you later as you get deeper into your Russian studies. And there's one other little subcategory, which I think kind of grammar people just make it harder for us. But when you read the textbooks as to which verbs take first conjugation, they're also going to say that verbs ending in ove a te miyaki znak also take the first conjugation. Well, when I was learning this, I'm like, yeah, no duh, it ends in a te miyaki znak. Why are you throwing in this extra little thing here trying to confuse me with this ove? The reason they call that out is because these ovat verbs, as they're called, conjugate slightly differently than verbs that don't end in the ove, okay? We're going to talk about ovat verbs in another video, so subscribe to the channel if you want to get notified when that comes out. For today, we're just starting with the basics, those verbs that end in the a te miyaki znak. Okay, now that you know which verbs require the first conjugation, we need to understand what endings are added to these verbs. Now, this principle is pretty easy. There's only 6 endings, and the endings correspond to the personal pronoun that's used. Now, I don't really like grammar, and so personal pronouns, like, what is that? I don't know what that is. So here are the 6 personal pronouns. Ya, which is I, ty, the informal singular of you, on, ana, ano, he, she, it, they all get the same ending. Мы, which is we, вы, the formal or plural form of you, and then ani, they. That's it. There's 6 personal pronouns, and there's 6 endings that correspond to each one of those. So understanding how these pair up are really pretty easy. Without actually going into how to add the endings to the verbs correctly, we'll do that in the next step. I just want you to understand which endings are required, and it's an easy concept. If you want to say, I'm reading, here's ya. So you would say ya, citat, the verb to read, and then you would put the correct ending on it, the u ending. So anytime you say ya, you need the u ending. And all of these correspond just like they're displayed in the graph here. So if we jump over to muy, we want to say we are reading, we would say muy, that's Russian for we. And then at the end of citat, the verb to read, we would put the yem ending because yem goes with muy. Okay, now you're looking at these 6 endings, you're comparing them against the English personal pronouns, but you may be thinking to yourself, well, what if I want to say the teacher is reading? That's not an option here. It's I, you, he, she, it, we, they. Anytime you're referring to who or what is doing something that doesn't fall into one of these 6 categories, it always takes the on, ana, ano endings, the he, she, it endings. So take the example, the teacher is reading. We can't say I'm reading because maybe I'm not the teacher, right? We want to say the teacher is reading. Well, we could replace teacher with it or he or she, right? She's reading. So the teacher is reading would be uchitel chitает. All right? That's pretty easy. Anytime you're referring to anything that doesn't fall into one of these categories, it takes the yet ending. The one caveat to that is if it's plural, if there's more than one person or thing doing it, then you're going to use the ani ending because the ani is plural. So the teacher is reading would be uchitel chitает. But if you wanted to say the teachers are reading, more than one, you would say учителя читают. You see how it takes the plural ending there? Let me give you a few tips that I used when I was memorizing these endings back when I was learning conjugation in high school. So let's take a look at the 6 endings. They all start with one of 2 vowels, either you or yeah. So the ya form takes you. And the way that I remember that is ya is I, but you is the Russian letter U, but U in English means you. It's kind of the opposite of I. So this may be kind of twisting your brain up and you may not like it, but this worked for me when I was remembering it. I remembered that I goes to you. It's kind of the opposite of I versus you. And then what you're going to notice is almost always, not always because there's always exceptions, but almost always the ya form, which is the first in this list, and the ani form, which is last in this list, are almost always the same, except the ani form gets the te ending. So it goes from you in the ya form to yut in the ani form. I hope that makes a little bit of sense to you. That's how I remember it. Now, that's 2 of the 6 endings. There's 4 more left, and we know that everything else starts with the letter ye. The way that I remember these is that muy, we, starts with the letter M, and the ending to muy is also M. So the ending for muy is yem. Okay, so that's 3 of the 6 endings. The other 3 I just kind of memorized, but it's only 3. I figure, that's doable. Okay, next, let's go learn how to conjugate verbs, or in other words, put these endings onto verbs correctly. And I want to use the verb znat as an example. This is one of the first words that I ever learned in Russian, and I can remember coming home from high school so excited to be learning Russian finally, and I had a little flashcard in front of me, and I was trying to memorize this word, and it's hard, it's new sounds, new alphabet, and I'm young, so I'm not super smart, and I was having a hard time memorizing it. And my dad walks in, he's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm trying to memorize this word in Russian." He's like, "What is it?" And I said, "Znat." He's like, "Oh, what's it mean?" And I said, "To know." He's like, "Well, that's easy." And I was like, "What do you mean that's easy? I've been trying this for 10 minutes and I still don't have it." And he just looked at me. He's like, "Znat sounds like snot, which comes out of your nose. So znat means to know." I've never forgotten it ever since. So thanks, Dad. If those little mnemonics help you, I've got a whole bunch of them. I'm going to share them with you, but I'd be curious to know if they help you or if it just slows your memorization down more. Leave a note in the comment if you would, and let me know if you want me to keep throwing those out there. You're like, man, that's just one more thing to remember. That doesn't work for me. Okay, so now that we know the verb znat means to know, let's learn how to conjugate this verb. And it's a very easy process. It's just 2 steps. The first step is we drop the temyaki znak. So we just take that right off, and then we add the correct ending. So let's take the example ty. We want to say you know using the informal ty. What we would do is we would first put our ty up here because we want to say you know. The correct ending that goes with ty is yesh. So we bring that up and we add it to the ending and we get ty znaish. So let's do another. They read. So they is ani, so we bring that up. The first step is to drop the temyaki znak, and then we add the correct ending for they, which is yut. So ani znayut. Not hard at all, really, right? It's just memorizing endings and knowing which ending goes with which personal pronoun. Hey, real quick, you guys, if you're learning something, smash that like button. I'd appreciate it. Spasiba. I'm going to give you another one here, and I'm going to give you some scenarios, and I want you to see if you can add the ending without my help, and then I'll give you the answer after a few seconds. The next verb that we're going to use is abishat. Abishat sounds like I'll be shot. And the verb abishat in Russian means to promise. So the way I remember this is I'll be shot if I break my promise. Works for me. Hope it works for you. Abishat. All right, I'm going to give you an example here. Let's say he promises. How would you say that in Russian? I'm going to give you 5 seconds. Hear the ending. See if you can put that together. Okay, we want to say he promises. So we put he up here. The first step is to drop the temyaki znak. Don't forget to do that. And then we put the correct ending. And because we're saying he, the correct ending with he is yet. On обещает. On обещает. Let's try one more, and then I'm going to mix this up just a little bit. It's going to be a little bit of a variation, and I think it's really going to drive this point home for you. Let's use the example, I promise. How would you say I promise in Russian? I'll give you 5 seconds to figure that out. Okay, we want to say I promise, so we put ya up here for I. Our first step is to drop the temyaki znak and then add the correct ending that goes with I, you. So we say ya обещаю. For the last example here, I want to switch it up on you just a little bit. And to help you understand what we're doing, I'm going to share an experience I had in the first grade. Math was never very easy for me. I can remember being in the first grade, we would get these sheets of paper with long equations and we had to add them, and our teacher was trying to get us to memorize her addition tables. You know, so we would do like 4 plus 3, and I was a finger counter. I'd be like 4, 5, 6, 7. I'd be like, okay, so it's 7, and I would write it down. And we would do this what seemed like forever for me. I'm sure it was just a day or two. Well, one day I walk in and my teacher hands out these papers and my mind is just blown. She had different equations on there. It was 5 plus, and then this box, an empty box, equals 8. And I was just, my little first grade mind couldn't wrap my head around what was going on. I'm like, my teacher is giving me the answers to equations that aren't even completely filled out. What's she thinking? And I really thought she'd lost it. Obviously, as adults, we get what's going on there. But for my little first grade head, that was just way out there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you some verbs, and it's kind of like that. I'm going to give you the answer. What I want you to tell me is who or what is doing the action based on the ending. And I'm going to use the verb chitat to do this. This means to read. The way I remember this one, and not all verbs have these little tricks. These happen to. So you're lucky, I guess. Chitat sounds like she taught. So the way I remember that one is she taught them to read. And the verb chitat means to read. All right, here's the first one that I want to give you. Читаете. Читаете. Tell me who or what is reading in this case. I'll give you a few seconds to figure that out. That's right. We see that the ending here, the yetje, goes with vui. So we know that you, either formal or plural, is doing the reading. Let me give you one more. Chitayet. Chitayet. Who or what is doing the reading there? That's correct. He, she, or it is doing the reading because they take the ending yet. Now, you'd have to get this from context. If you were talking about a girl the whole time and you wanted to say chitayet, you would just know that it's she's reading. You would get that from context of the conversation there. Okay, so let me give you a little tip here to help you learn these and actually use them a little bit more fluently. When I first started speaking Russian and using verb conjugations, this part of my speech or my dialogue was very clunky. I was having to think, okay, is it first or second conjugation? And which personal pronoun am I using? And then which ending? Now I got to drop the temyaki knock and add it. And now I'm finally ready to get that verb out or that word out to the person that I'm talking to. And it would take me a good, sometimes 3 or 4 seconds. And obviously when we're talking, we don't put a 3-second pause in between all of our words. What you're going to have to do to get over that hurdle is you've got to memorize the endings and you've got to pair them with the personal pronouns. It's just some memorization that you're going to have to do. I gave you those tips earlier, but you're going to have to get good at it, and you will get good at it. I can remember thinking I didn't even know how to say, I know, we think, you read. Сегодня я могу говорить, я знаю, вы читаете, они думают, я даже не думаю об этом. It's as natural to me as it is speaking good English grammar. It just comes without thinking, and it'll get that way for you too. I promise. The reason I'm telling you this is because a lot of Russian students will get bogged down with the endings and they'll get frustrated and they'll be like, my thinking is so slow and it's so choppy. They don't like it. And so they give up on Russian. And I don't want you to do that. It's going to take you time. I actually figured out a few different cheats and some ways to help me learn it a little bit faster. And I've talked about those in this video here. So go watch that video, memorize the endings, and you'll become much more proficient in Russian. Ну хорошо, тогда это все. Спасибо и увидимся.